Mr. Mayor, these numbers that we're throwing around, the acronyms that we're throwing around, can all seem somewhat esoteric to the average resident. And I'm wondering if I can get from you what the city of Oakland is going to look like if and when these budget cuts are going to be made, and they're going to be made one way or the other. What's the city going to look like?
Well, first of all, if your question is, are we going to drop into a dark hole? My answer is no, I don't believe that. We're looking at deficits, but we're not looking at the end of the world. I mean, I think it's important to look at this through the eyes of realism, number one, and number two, the significant belief that we can come out of this. The federal government is working very diligently to help us develop a strategy of economic recovery, and some people may quarrel with the president in his approach, but I believe that his approach is rooted in solid ideas. That is, we live in the context of a mixed economy, and where the federal government and the public sector spends hundreds of billions into the trillions of dollars, how that money is spent can have an impact on the economy. I think that drives the president's strategy. And number two, if you engage in problem solving, you're going to generate employment. Those two are fundamental ideas. So I think even in the context of this budget deficit, where we may have to cut back on some services, and even, for example, in the police department, the question that I asked the chief was that if we ended up, worst case scenario, in a place where we had to cut some police, if I'm a resident of Oakland, what would that look like? Would the residents of Oakland be able, with their eyes on a daily basis, to see that cut? And the response was no, because the police officers on the streets and in the beats, et cetera, will continue to be there. So that if there are cuts, there would be cuts in other areas that would have a secondary impact, like investigations and, you know, and special units and these kind of things. But out there in the field every day on the streets, it would be the same. As you know, we're divided into 3 public safety districts. That will continue to go on. We have a captain in each place that's accountable. That will go on. We have police officers in each beat on a 312 designation. All of that will continue to go on. So Oakland, you know, Oakland will look like Oakland. There'll just be a few things that we will have to do differently. There will be, we'll have a few less workers, but as I said, on the other side of it, I think the future for Oakland lies in our ability to tap this moment when we do have the federal government, A, willing to be our partner, and B, the federal government that has some deep pockets, that can put some money into the game that can help us. And so it's in Oakland's best interest to think long-term, and we've already gone down that road with our Oakland partnership, so we've been thinking long-term. So Oakland is positioned well to say to the federal government, we're not starting at ground zero. We're off the ground. We're shovel-ready at a range of levels.
Is it fair to have an expectation of you, given your years in Congress, that Oakland would receive more money than other cities, that Oakland would perform better in getting access at these?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and my answer would be yes, and my caveat would be as follows. My answer would be yes, because I don't know any other mayor in America that's spent over 3 decades in Washington. I understand Washington. I understand the rhythm of Washington. I understand the language of policymakers, and I understand the decision-making process. But again, I'm not the Lone Ranger. What I do have to present is a coherent program, a coherent set of ideas. And so that means that I'm only one member of the team of community people who bring forward a coherent stimulus program that engages our agencies on an intergovernmental basis, our nonprofits and community people, chambers of commerce, labor, et cetera, all of our stakeholders, you know, in a mosaic that makes sense. So Yeah, I mean, I do know Washington, D.C., and what I've said was, give me the ball, but don't give me a deflated ball. Don't give me a mediocre ball. I came in here talking about big ideas and received some criticism as a result of having big ideas. But I would suggest that one of the problems was we had no partner in the White House. We had no partner in the federal government. The White House never took on the urban dilemma, never took on urban issues, never took on environmental issues. You know, they were busy, you know, waging war and spending hundreds of billions of dollars, you know, based on, in my humble opinion, absurd ideas. But now, 2 years later, we do have someone in the White House who recognizes the need to partner. So the question is, am I prepared to exploit this moment because now we do have a partner? And I use the term exploit positively, not negatively. My answer is yes. And I would do every single thing that I possibly can. You know, I've met with the White House, with the vice president people, with the stimulus czar, with HUD, with EPA, with Justice Department. I've met with, you know, the Attorney General personally, Chief of Staff, all the funding people. And I was able to do that alone and work very diligently on behalf of Oakland. So I'm prepared to be held to that, you know. And first of all, and finally, I'm just thankful that we have someone there who gets it. And in Washington, D.C., you know, I come in contact with this incredibly young, thoughtful group of people. And so I recognize very clearly that the country has been turned over to a new generation. And if you go to Washington, you will see them in all these wonderful places, young people who look like you, who run in the government. And that's very exciting to me.
You talked about the police grant and the number of people applying for it. A lot of people are wondering, you know, what's real and what's not, and that you know it better than anyone. You also talked about Measure Y and the minimum service levels that are called for in Measure Y. What is your view? When it all shakes out, do you think the city will be able to meet those minimum service levels and provide the 63 officers, the police, or the fire services and the violence prevention that Measure Y?
I would simply say rather than minimum, those are maximum, because that's the 803 was the end strength level. So if what, I understand the nature of your question, and maybe I'm not quarreling with you, but I'm simply saying that I think that that's the maximum effort. 803, which is triggered by 739. So if your question is, do you think at the end of the day we will be able to maintain the integrity of 739? I'm going to hope that we can, but I believe at the end of the day that we're going to have to find other resources outside the COPS program to fill that gap of 140 if we're going to fill it.
How much COPS money is that?
For us, remember, we asked for 23 million.
Right, does that cover those
Yeah.
40?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, so, you know, when you think about it, we're competing in a pot of $500 million. So when I talked with them the other day, they said, look, we would love to be able to give you the exact dollar amount, tell you exactly, but we can't. But I'm confident that Oakland is going to receive a significant amount of money. Whether we get the $23 million at this point is speculative. I'm just trying to stay very positive and continue to communicate to them that we're a poster child. We need this. If you really want to save the day, save Oakland, because this is a city that has aggressively embraced community policing, problem solving, and let us not get hurt on this altar. But we'll see what happens.